Welcome, Al.
Hey, Tiffany, I'm so excited to be here with you and great seeing you as always.
Yes. So I just want to prepare you because, I've been doing probates for 10 years, but as I really wanted to prepare for this episode because I feel like a lot of, not just our listener base, our students, everything, are deep into probates. There's always all these nuances that can kill a deal. And so what I want to do today, if you don't mind, is I want to dive into the overarching process. And then we'll dive into like timelines, state by state issues. We'll get into like different seller psychology. How do we handle conflict if people don't agree? Lots of good stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and dive in if it's cool with you.
Yeah, let's dive in on this, Tiffany. It's always a blast with probate.
All right. So let's first break it down into like third grade terms of how the probate process works in general.
Very simple. We always start with title to property. So for your listeners, we're dealing with real estate a lot, right? So we always start with the title. Now, who's on the title to the property? Now, when you have somebody that owns the real estate, it's in their name. It's not in a trust. It's not in an LLC or anything like that. It's in their name and they die. States like Florida and probably some other states out there require probate to be done. And what that is, it's a formal process where we're preparing paperwork to be filed with the court. We prepare the paperwork. We put who the beneficiaries are. We put the property address, the deceased person. We list everything out. All the heirs sign it. They get it notarized. They send it back. And the probate process is now filing it in the courthouse, getting everything submitted, sending the court orders to the judge. The judge signs, reviews everything, and then we send it back and get it to the title company. That process, that's probate. Moving the title out of the deceased person's name to who the true heirs are. So now they can now sell the property now that the asset has been distributed.
Okay. Now, what if they have a will versus no will versus a trust?
Okay, so we'll break down the three and I'll talk specifically for Florida, but some other states could maybe have the same things, right? So will or no will in Florida, it still needs probate. So you'd be surprised. A lot of people do not have estate plans. A lot of people don't have any of that set up and they have no will. That needs probate. And a lot of people are surprised. They think, oh, well, I don't want to go through probate. I'm just going to do a will. You still need to go through probate because that will has to be examined for signatures, that it's acknowledged, that it's done in the presence of people. I mean, there's certain formalities. Now, the common question I get is what you brought up, the trust. The general rule is that trusts avoid probate. But here's the thing. There's a couple different scenarios that happen for investors. One, they find a piece of property that's titled in a trust, but now they can't find the trust. Or the people that were named trustees on the trust, they can't be located, they're dead, they don't want to cooperate. So now what do? It's a different kind of mechanism in probate court. Now, another thing that happens is they'll find a piece of property, investors will all find this, and when they contact the seller's adamant that the property was titled in a trust. Well, what you'll find out is, well, yes, maybe that person did a trust, but the thing that they missed and didn't do, they forgot to title the property into the trust. And when you don't title the property into the trust, now it's still in that person's name. Now you need probate. So people hear trust and they immediately go, oh yeah, that's out. But there could be a lot of nuances that happen with the title insurance industry that people miss out on.
I'm writing that down because I actually just did all new estate planning myself and made sure everything that I own is in a trust, but I haven't actually deeded it to the trust yet. So I wrote that note down. So in terms of, that's going to take me down a rabbit hole now with you. So I was told by the attorney, though, that no matter what, it wouldn't have to go through probate because they can go see that the trust on file clearly states that anything that I own is in that trust.
Well, yeah, I mean, the purpose of doing the trust is to make sure that the assets that you have are titled in the trust so you avoid probate. But from time to time, what happens is sellers, people, anybody, they'll forget that there's certain assets they forgot to title. So a great example is there's a bank account, and this happens a lot. The people had the whole estate plan. They titled the house in the trust. They titled everything, the car, whatever there is, but they missed the bank account. And so the only other route or way to put it back into the trust is to do what's called a pour over will. But if you have the pour over will, it contemplates anything that goes back into the trust. You still need probate. So the whole goal of estate planning is to make sure that with a trust, at least if that's the mechanism you're using, every asset you contemplate is specifically titled in that trust name.
We're going to have to take that offline and have another discussion about my own. All right. So let's dive back in and go back to the process. So what is the difference between an executor and an administrator?
So the term is different for each state, right? There's different ones. Florida's personal representative. Some states, like I think it's Georgia, has executor, or maybe other states have that name, or administrator, administratix. It's really the term, that person that's going to represent the estate for the probate. Now, I will tell you, a lot of times, at least in Florida world, we don't even need to go down that road with those people, right? A lot of times when we're just dealing with the real estate, we're just dealing with all the heirs. The type of probate that we're doing doesn't rise to the level of getting an administrator or an executor. But if you have that kind of deal, or you're working in that kind of state where it's required, it's just that person that's put in charge, the one that's chosen to be, or maybe they were named to be the most responsible to handle collecting the assets, signing the contract, signing the documents, collecting all the assets from the estate. It's just that one person that gets assigned and named. Either it's in a will, or if it's no will, it's just somebody that maybe the family or they all kind of gather and say, hey, you're the one to do this.
Okay. So just to clarify, the difference between executor and administrator doesn't have anything to do with whether they have a will or not.
For some states, no. What it means is it's just a different term for different states for who that main person is that's representing the estate. So like Florida's personal representative, another state may be named executor. It's just a different term of art for a different state.
Okay. Speaking of that, what do you think are some of the most prevalent things to look into based on the state? Like, are there specific parts of the probate process that typically always vary state to state?
As far as I know, yes, there's different things that vary state to state, right? So, I can speak to a couple of them. I know at least in Texas has a whole different method of probate where a lot of times based on the type of estate, you don't need to go through the full blown probate administration, and they have their affidavits of heir systems where it just gets filled out, filed, with the court houses. And then like I've seen those before where they get really filled out, very detailed. And that's one state. North Carolina, I've heard, is another state that you can get into stuff like that. And some of the things vary. So one of the things that you would look for is what kind of state is it? Do they require probate, or are they going more to the affidavits of heirs? But I will tell you, just because you're going into probate in Florida doesn't mean it's a deal that you want to pass up either, you know? And so you don't want to get hung up on just the simplicity of the system, because you could be giving up a deal that actually has great margins and a lot of potential. But one thing I'll say is I was in Arizona doing a podcast interview one time, and one of the attorneys out there, I know, he was telling me, oh, Arizona's has a pretty simple system with like 4 to 8 weeks or 2 to 4 weeks with small estates. And then I was like, what about California? And he was like, oh, California is like 9 months, 12 months, 2 years. And in my world, Tiffany, 2 years, I'm like, I don't know who's waiting around for that. My world is like 4 weeks, 2 weeks, 8 weeks, you know, like I'm fast moving. So if I'm an investor, I'm also looking at the time frames, of course, like what are generally the time frames? Are things moving? And also, you know, we live in this virtual world too of paper filings and systems. Some courthouses in other states still do walk-ins and snail mail, and thankfully, a lot of Florida's moved out of that to this virtual world. So, you know, there's different ways and different systems that are working in other states. But, you know, if there's meat on the bone and there's a great deal out there, You just got to find really, it's finding the right lawyer in that state. I
Correct.
think that's the key.
Yeah. So for anyone listening to this, it's kind of funny talking through this. I forgot about my first days as an investor. But when I first got started in real estate a decade ago, foreclosures and probates were the two main lists that I would target because they were just super niche. You know, I didn't have a lot of money. And so I got really solid on the process on both of them. Well, back then, before COVID, there's a difference between pre-COVID and post-COVID, but pre-COVID, it was a 1-day probate. Like if all you had was the real estate house and that was it, I didn't even need an attorney. I would just tell the seller like, hey, I know this process can be overwhelming. As long as this is the only asset that there is, we could walk down to the courthouse. I would wait in line with them. I would fill out the paperwork with them. And then we would literally probate the house in a day. But then COVID happened, and obviously we couldn't physically go to the courthouse anymore, and it became a disaster. I'd have to ask Josh because he handles leading the transaction side now, but I know for a while we had to like overnight mail, and then they had to like check the mail, make sure it didn't have COVID and like all this crazy stuff. So I think what our 1-day process now has become like a 3 to 4 week process at least. We have personally stopped handling it on our own anyways. Now we have a probate attorney locally that whenever we have a probate and we find out they don't have an attorney yet, we put them in touch with our attorney. We go through the whole process, and then we tell the seller, as long as it's the only asset that needs probated, he looks into it for us, and then he'll put it on the HUD so he gets paid at closing, and then we offer covering it for our sellers. But like, let's dive into the seller side of this process. So far, right, someone passed away. The title was in their personal name, so now it's got to go to probate court. What is the difference in the process if, say, that's their only asset, or if they have like retirement accounts and all these other things compared to someone that just had a real estate house? Does that make sense how I'm asking?
Yeah, basically, sometimes what happens is the acquisitions is on the phone and they just say, hey, there's just the house. But then they get on the phone with the lawyer and then you find out there's IRAs, brokerage. Oh, it happens all the time. And, I'm always prepared for that. Like, in my early years, I was like, wait, what's this about? What's this account? But now I'm prepared for that conversation. And, really most of the times there's really not much of a difference in the type of probate that we would do if that comes up. However, there are times, and I've had several deals this year already like this, where there's the primary residence, but now there's bank accounts of 200,000, 400,000, and they, and they want that money too. As lawyers, we're always coming up with different strategies on how do we find a way that we can take care of the house, but then also solve their problem as well. And how do we make that work? And I'm always thinking through that kind of stuff because it's a win-win-win for everybody. If you're able to have that lawyer on your side or for the client that can say, hey, we'll take care of the house, but also we'll help you take care of getting the $500,000, it's great. And like I said, many times it doesn't change, but sometimes then we have to do that full-blown probate, that formal administration. And, the thing that I think a lot of people miss, and it's a very, it's like, it should be the number one concept for a lot of people in acquisitions and talking to sellers, is that communication and being thorough, right? Whenever I'm on the conference calls, I'm very thorough with the seller and explaining and walking through the process of plan A, plan B. They're not going to see the money yet right away, because what happens is there's a rush to just get the sale, but then the seller still doesn't understand what's happening with the other assets. So having that thorough, transparent communication is what really wins the day with a lot of them. And I get the feedback later, Tiffany. I get the feedback where they'll say, thank you so much for walking through that process, because the last lawyer that I talked to never explained any of that. And I'm thinking, really? Like, how do you not explain these things to people? So it's having great communication.
So obviously, most of these folks are going through emotional and logistical challenges. So walk through some of what those issues can be during the probate process.
Yeah, so I think logistical is, eventually they want to find a place to live, or, they've been in that house, that mom's house for many years, and now, you're going to buy the property, and where do we go? They have no place to go. And I think one of the best solutions is to help the seller also figure that out as well. And then that makes them feel more comfortable with doing the deal too. But also some of the emotional aspects is some people haven't gotten over it after 5-10 years, and it's the one thing that they're holding on to before moving on and, going forward. And it takes a lot for them to go through their documents and walk through the analysis. It's almost like it takes them back to that moment. And I think and I did this a long time ago, and I think I explained it this way, which is, some of the best things you can do with the sellers is, while there is empathy for the situation, it's to keep it very transactional also with what they're trying to achieve with their result, right? If you focus on that emotion, that could take you guys down a rabbit hole. But if you focus on, wait, let's get back to the big picture. We got this property. How can we help you? How can we solve it? And I hear that a lot on the conference calls, because when I walk through the probate process, that's when sometimes that emotion comes out about, okay, what do we do? And then don't forget, a lot of these people, they don't have the resources, for everyday. Some of these other people, like, they can immediately go to a notary. They can immediately go to the bank. Some of these people can't leave work. They can't leave their job. They work night shifts. And so you got to get really creative with some of these different maneuvers. So some of them work from 2 in the morning. And so, how do you work through some of these, whether it's mobile notaries or getting somebody boots on the ground over there? A lot of times it's just trying to listen to what they're saying, and how can we help solve it and make it easier for you?
So what happens if there is conflict with the heirs? So, like, let's just say the last parent passes away. I assume it goes equally to their kids if there's not a will or something. Like, what if one kid doesn't agree with something? Or, like, at what point can a family, like, move the needle if someone doesn't agree with things?
So really simply, if you have a scenario where, let's just say, mom dies, no will, no surviving spouse, 4 kids ever, 2 want to sell, 2 don't. The basics are, one, the probate still has to be done. The probate still has to be done that gets the title over. The next thing is, what's everybody want to do? Do the 2 kids actually really want to get a lawyer that can file what's called a partition action, or serve them a demand letter and force the sale of the property to a private listing or auction? Or do they maybe want to just say, no, we don't really want to deal with this. We'll let you, investor, take care of it. So, we've seen some really interesting things lately in our title world. And so what'll happen is that very scenario where there's 2 and 2 don't want to sell, and it gets to the point of the litigation and the partition lawsuit, or eventually maybe a negotiation. And they come to the table and eventually work things out. That can happen. But the industry, at least in our industry, Tiffany, it's really maneuvered a lot to this curative title world of, like, how do people kind of get into this? Like, what are the solutions? What are the scenarios on how to get into these deals? And a lot of investors are getting very creative with these deals, where they've bought out interest, or they do the
signed interest or something.
Yeah, they do all these different creative ways to either try to, like, then they're on the title, then they negotiate, or maybe then they're the ones that get the lawyer. It's very interesting. So just because you have a deal where there are conflicting heirs, it's still worth taking the time to look at if it fits your model, or if the numbers actually make sense, on if you want to go down that curative title route of trying to buy out interest or kind of deal with it that way. But there's different methods.
How do you verify who's the legal authority to sell? Like, let's say that they get on the phone with one of their kids or a family member that might not be the person that has even the right to sell. How do you verify that?
So, this is what happens a lot when I get on the phone too. So when you're on the call, first of all, if you're in the investing world, or at least if you're not in Florida, it's really critical that you get in contact with a really amazing probate lawyer in your state so you can learn what the intestate statute is and what the intestacy laws are so that you can figure out who comes next in order. Because it's not just the law to say that's the law. Like that law will help your acquisitions team understand what the order of succession is on who you need to talk to. So that's number one, like learning that stuff. The second thing is walking through that, right? And now if you're on a phone call and you're talking to Susie and you look on the title to the property and you see that the name says John, that's the last deed of record. Well, first thing is, who are you, Susie, related to John, right? And where is John? Well, John's dead. Okay, so who are you then? Well, I'm the cousin. Well, if they say I'm the cousin, that's like really far down the line. So then you really got to piece through and say, okay, well, when John died, do you know if John had a will? Okay, no will. When John died, at the time he died, did he have a surviving spouse? No surviving spouse. How many children ever? And then they say a couple, okay, great, you stop there. If they say none, then you got to go up to parents. And you see where I'm going with this, right? Like if there's none, you go up to parents, grandparents. None of those, brothers, sisters, ever. Now let's say Susie goes, oh yeah, there were 3 brothers and sisters ever, if they're all alive. No will, stop. And that's the idea, is that there's a certain point where in the intestacy law, those would be the true heirs. Those would be the ones that would have authority to sign. And if you're in one of those states where there's an executor, get with somebody that does that over there, then maybe that's that person. But at least here in Florida, when we're dealing with property, it's all those true people in that line that you would need. Those have the authority.
Okay. How do like debts or taxes work when you go to close a probate property? So I'm assuming when you go to sell that property, obviously if there's a mortgage on it, that has to get paid first because it's a lien. Is there anything else that has to be thought of when you go to close it other than, I assume, like paying an attorney that's involved?
Well, I mean, if they run a title search, you can get a title commitment. The title report's going to have the different things that are on the title, whether it's code violations, liens, taxes, judgments, like you said, mortgage, anything attached to the real property, HOA liens, that's got to get resolved. Now, if what you're talking about with debts of the deceased person, like credit card bills, hospital bills, at least every state's different. I can't remember I think South Carolina was like 8 months, but there's different states that have different types of statutory timelines. At least here, if the date of death is more than 2 years, all of them are out. All the creditors are out. So we're not concerned with that. But there's times where we've had cases where it's just the primary residence and they have 10 credit cards, 2 hospital bills, the nursing rehabilitation centers calling everybody. Now, if we're only dealing with homestead, while those people get served, doesn't mean they have a claim. So in the probate process, we would deal with those things. But if it's attached to the real property, that has to be resolved through title. And that's where I separate the two, because we get that question a lot with heirs about that they have debts. They're worried about the debts. How does it get resolved? But the IRS, mortgage, major improvements to the property, that's got to get paid.
So what are some of the most important questions that they should ask a seller, like once they find out that someone just passed away?
Have you retained an attorney yet to do probate? That would definitely be one, because if they have, now you know that they're going down that path of trying to get the legal authority. I think it would go into the same questions you would ask about the property, maybe who's in the property, what's going on with the property. Do you have any other siblings? And again, it starts with the who are you related to that person on the title, walking through the family lineage. And I don't think it's anything different than another real estate transaction, except for the fact that you're parsing through the family lineage and you're also combing through what other assets they're dealing with, maybe that, they need to deal with. Sometimes they'll walk you through it, but your focus really is just the real estate. That's the big picture.
So there's a house down the road from where I live right now, and both parents passed away, I guess, in 2016. Me and Josh are really interested in buying this property. So we found the siblings who we just believed by looking it up on who would have it, because it's still titled in the people that died years ago. So my assumption is, because the yard's kept clean and all that, that they're paying taxes for them and all that. But what happens, like, can the house just stay titled in that person's name as long as taxes are being paid? I guess they're not selling it because all the siblings are fighting. So, like, at what point does action get taken on this?
Well, they can keep paying the taxes. It's not going to change the title of the.
So I guess, like, at the end of the day, if a mortgage company and the city they just care they're getting paid. So even if someone was gone, they just care they're getting paid.
Whether it's on the foreclosure side, unless the bank finds out that the person died and then they initiate the foreclosure proceedings. But if the taxes get paid and the mortgage gets paid and the bank doesn't care, the title will just still stay in that person's name. I mean, the function of the auctions is to help eliminate the interest of that title if somebody doesn't pay, right? So if they are behind in the taxes and they don't pay, or it goes into foreclosure, eventually once it goes to auction and there's a new buyer, the probate's not needed unless now the heirs want to go collect their surplus from the auctions, and that's still going to need probate. And that's another niche that a lot of people have gotten into, which is surplus. But
I've heard about that. I was at an event recently where someone was talking about that. That's like all they do.
Yeah.
And they do really well with it. But they went through the whole process. That's for another day. But yeah, that's a great strategy that we can bring up on a different podcast. At the end of the day, then, since those siblings aren't getting along, they're not agreeing, but they're keeping the taxes current and everything, can one of the siblings override the other, or do they have to take them to court and, like, go through a whole process?
Depends on the state, but if we were, let's just say hypothetically, dealing with that in Florida, what would then happen is probate still has to get done, right? At the end of the day, step one, probate's got to get done. If one of them's not on board, or if three of them are and one of them's not on board, that one still gets served, but they're basically getting served with a document that says you're going to get your share, but we're still going to force this to go through probate. So you get the probate process done, but then that's where you still then need to take it to that next step of, what does everybody want to do with the property? Well, you can't cut it in half. So then you got to force the sale and push it to a public or private listing or auction. And in that process, that's where that person that's been paying those taxes, if they have proof, can come back to try to get that reimbursement back off the sale. But they got to walk through all of that in litigation too. And sometimes they just don't even want to pursue that, and they split it up evenly. But a lot of times it comes down to like mediation or a negotiation agreement where everybody kind of comes to the table to say, yeah, this is how we're going to divide the money. But no matter what, that's still going to go through probate. I mean, and again, that's the scenario we're seeing a lot of in the curative title world right now. Is we have ones where there's 7 people, 7 heirs, Tiffany, and the investors got one of them under contract and still wants the deal to go chop down the tree 2, 3, 4, 5 and try to get as many interests as possible to then maybe have a solution at the end. Very popular to do that, but you still run it through probate first and then deal with that.
Yeah. So what do you think some of the biggest mistakes investors make during this process that makes the deal flop?
Due diligence on the title is definitely one. Had a deal, I remember it was 5 years ago, where everybody was all about it. Ended up needing 4 probates. So I was all in, and we knew everybody. And then as soon as we filed the probate, they found out that a corner of the lot was wetland, and now it totally killed the deal. So the due diligence, they didn't have it there. And they couldn't do the deal. It was it killed the deal. It was going to be $50,000 to rehabilitate that situation. And so another one is environmental studies. There was one.
Now let's back to that real quick about this triggered me to think about, let's say you have spouse that passes away and you got to probate their stuff or something, and they have debts that you can't. Is there ever a time where like you're stuck with someone's debt on anything in probate?
So we had a deal. It's a great question. We had a deal like 3 years ago. And based on the classification of the type of property, in Florida, we have homestead, primary residence, non-homestead, like vacation rental, secondary properties. This property ended up being a non-homestead property. The value of it was like 180 at the time, and this is like somewhere random, 180. And the date of death was like 6 months, so it was very recent. And we were in the middle of probate. All of a sudden, a creditor filed a claim for like $120,000 against the estate. Well, in that unique case, that type of claim had wheels because it was non-homestead protected. So they had a real argument to claim some of the assets from the estate. At the time, they were under contract. Once that thing came in, it totally killed the whole scenario and everybody just had to walk away. I mean, we were at the point of talking to the creditor and being like, you understand, like you get either something or nothing. And they were like, yeah, we're going to just hold our position here. And so it really.
So then what happens? The house just gets auctioned and then people walk away from it?
Eventually, either they hold on to it because they still had title to the property. The creditor didn't do anything with the property. The seller, the heir, still kept the property. And I guess they just wait until the values increase to the point where paying them off makes sense.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't make any sense why the court system would allow like just these vacant homes to sit around then.
There could be other mechanisms, like equitable distribution motions that could get filed that could basically say that based on the value, based on the creditor's value, it's like absorbing so much of the estate. So to try to get a court order to reduce the amount. I think with that particular case and that creditor, that's one of the ones in Florida that like they will take any and all. They'll try their best to get that money. And there was not enough money that the estate had to try to fight it either. So it was at that point of everybody just didn't even want to deal with it. So it was crazy. I still think about that one. It's very rare. I think there's only been 3 or 4 cases that we've had where creditors are so motivated enough to try to go after that money that they'll sue, and you can negotiate, I'm sure, on those, but that one was very heavy.
I would assume like mortgage companies, let's just say you're 60 to 75 years old and you want to go buy a property and you get a 30-year mortgage on it. Like I'm sure the stats say that you're going to pass away in the US within the time period of this mortgage. So banks probably like lose their ass on some of these. Like I would assume that there's quite a few of those that are happening across the country, and then it just sits there and goes to auction. Because a lot of times we'll talk to sellers that, well, what's kind of crazy is back when I first got started in real estate, back when I was like door knocking and hands-on and all that, I was really good at redeeming tax delinquent properties after the auction. And typically it would be because like someone died, the house was already passed off or paid off, but then the tax wasn't getting paid and the sibling just didn't family didn't talk or something. And so that stuff like always kind of blew me away that they didn't know. So then I would get a hold of them and I would say, hey, we can redeem this within 30 days or whatever. And we get some really crazy deals this way. Mm-hmm. But that was back when we could probate a house in like a day. So that wouldn't be able to happen today. But anyways, I'll go down another route if I keep going down the tax lien stuff. All right. So let's talk about just high level. I think you brought it up, but like if you're married, a spouse dies, typically then the spouse is the heir. If both of them die, it's to the kids, right? But what if there's stepkids versus non-stepkids?
We gotta back that up for a second. So
was I wrong?
Well, it's a concept it escapes some people. So it all goes back to the title to the property, right? And
So
so,
like I have a even though I have a trust, which obviously I haven't deeded into it, I have a survivorship deed.
okay. So the general thing that a lot of people have when they're married is husband and wife, right?
Yeah.
Josh and Tiffany as husband and wife. But you'd be surprised. There are some people out there that when they buy the property, they buy it in their name only, or they retitle it to say a married man or a married woman. And when they die, the assumption is that the spouse gets everything. That's where it gets a little dicey. And that's where still probate comes in. If you only have one of the spouses on the deed and they die, and we're dealing with homestead property, at least here, the spouse gets an interest, but so do the children, the kids as well.
So is that something that's state to state?
State to state, but it's something that gets brought up a lot because even here, where we deal with a lot of land, some people have spouses, they get divorced, they remarry, but they had kids from a different relationship. Not only does the spouse get it, but so do the kids. And so there's that assumption that the spouse automatically gets the 100% of the estate, but there has to be that analysis. But with you, it's husband and wife. Husband dies, wife gets everything on the deed, right? The survivorship, but they call it tenancy by the entireties. But it's a big thing that gets asked here.
Okay, so then not only do we need to verify, because that has a lot to do with then divorce situations too, we run into all the time on only one person being on the deed. You know, I'll give you an example. Josh's grandpa and grandma just passed away recently, and they're going through this whole process right now, actually. So the grandma passed away, and then there's 5 kids. One of their kids passed away of cancer, and that's actually Josh's father. And so his wife, is still around. So when the grandma passed away, the executor, one of the boys, was, too busy and has not put her, half of it through probate to the father yet. Well, then the father ended up unexpectedly dying. So then now the probate has to be for both of them. And so now there's 5 kids, but one of those 5 kids passed away. And then he has a surviving spouse and 2 kids. But they had a will that spelled out otherwise, here's where we want things to go. So does the will, it still goes through probate, but then does the will trump everything? What the will said goes?
Well, it depends on how the title flows as well. So and I'm thinking through this in my world. So let's just say you have grandma's interest. If all the kids are common or, whatever kind of property it is, goes to grandpa, then grandpa, it goes down to the 5 kids. But then the next question you have to find out is when did one of the children pass? Did they pass before grandpa or after?
Yes, before.
Well, in our Florida world, what happens is it bypasses this person. It drops straight down to their kids. So it avoids a probate, which means that the will for that person wouldn't come into play. Had that child died after grandpa, then it would go to their estate, then that would be probate, then the will for that particular interest would come into effect, and then it would distribute to whoever it is. That's the concept of post-decease versus pre-decease that ends up being a big question for a lot of investors that find deals and are trying to walk through the scenario. And that's a great thing to walk through. It's at what point do you then need another probate, and does that will become relevant? And that's the pre-decease, post-decease.
Okay. Yeah. And this is why, if you're listening, it's so important to build a relationship with a local probate attorney to the city in which you're marketing to. So let's just say you're a virtual flipper wholesaler listening to this and you live in the state of Ohio, but you virtually do something in Florida. Then Al would be someone you would want by your side for Florida specific properties. Because every state is different in terms of rules and structure. And so we have a go-to probate attorney in Franklin County where we're at. And so whenever we have a probate, we call him immediately. He knows we put them in touch, all of that. And so I really encourage everyone listening to build relationships with probate attorneys and really any attorney, divorce attorneys, eviction attorneys, etc. And although I have like one main go-to probate attorney, I have built a list of probate attorneys in my area. And over the years, I've tried to build a relationship with some of the bigger ones because every once in a while, about once a month, I shoot an email to them and I just say, hey, I have some funds opening up. Just please think of me if you have any clients that need to offload a property. They know that I buy as is, all that. Now, you want to build a relationship with them, obviously, first before you go send them an email like that. But, I would say every month when we send that email, we get leads every single time. And, most of the attorneys are to the point. They respond and they're like, 123 Main Street, lockbox code here, get me an offer by tomorrow. Like, that's all they say. So, and then the other thing that has blown my mind, because a lot of wholesaling and investor laws are changing across the country. And it's because the bad apples are like ruining the name for this, right? Because like I worked in the oil field industry and in the building materials, and it's wild. We wholesaled like 20 times before it ever even got to a consumer, but yet we're not talking about that. So in this space, for some reason, there's like this notion that, investors are slimy. But here's the reality. Think about these stories we're telling you right now, just with probate. Like a lot of times, unfortunately, there's families that are broken or they don't even talk to their parents, they don't even know a sibling died. They don't know these things, right? They don't want to have anything to do with fixing a house up. They want nothing to do with putting a dime into the property. And really the only option a lot of times these people have is they need a service. They don't just need to list their house and sell it, right? And so we are essentially profiting off of a service that I don't know if they otherwise a lot of times know what the hell to do, and they would lose it to auction anyways. And so the way we've been able to separate ourselves is by having that relationship with a probate attorney who takes over the process. What we do is we have them evaluate the situation first and then come back and say, hey, yeah, this is probably going to cost, $1,100 to $1,500 for this one or whatever. And so we then agree or disagree to take on the property after we understand what's going on with title. And then we'll pay for the attorney to finish out the probate as long as they sell us the property. And so most times, though, those are situations where these people, it's either they get money or they don't. And it's no different than foreclosure or and like if someone's inheriting something. I had a call from a seller once. The mother just had a stroke and was getting ready to pass through this situation and was like, I live in Chicago. My mother has no family in Columbus. Literally, she's lived in the house for 30 years. I don't have time to go there in this house. I don't want to have anything to do with going to the house. I don't have the funds to do anything. Can you guys please take care of everything for me? Get an attorney, clear out the house. I said, okay, as long as you understand I have to make a profit. Like, we're very transparent, right? And so just remember, when we talk to these sellers that are in these situations, we have to show empathy for the situation. We need to thoroughly understand what's going on. If they need an attorney, let's go provide them a solution. We're not just getting paid to buy a discounted house, right? We need to help them get through the situation in the first place. And so I get the question a lot, where do you find these leads? Now, there's list providers for probate, but if you're just getting started, when I got started in the game, I would literally physically go to the courthouse back in the day. And my dad would teach me how to pull out every file for foreclosure and probate. And he would teach me how to read. Now, things have gone really digital in a lot of places now. So you can literally just call and buy the list or get it electronically. But there's a lot of data providers out there, like Data Syndicate is a great provider. But there are small towns where it's like, that's still not a thing. You got to go to the courthouse and physically get them. And you'll laugh at this, but when I was growing up, my father would take me to the courthouse when I was in high school. We'd pull out every court case. We'd read every detail, write down the names, and we would go door knock all of them right after we left the courthouse. And it's just funny because like we live in a town of 1,000 people. So like buying that list was not a thing back then. But anyways, if you could give a final piece of advice for investors looking for probate deals, what is some advice you would give them?
I would go after any of the lead sources that are like direct to seller, like you're talking about. I still think that those are the hot ones, the pre-foreclosures, the tax delinquents, the code violations. But I would say that this is actually an amazing niche that a lot of people seem to not want to get into because it's a little messy and finding heirs. These can be your biggest deals that you can get out there. There are plenty of investors that I've worked on probates with where they're getting 50, 60, 100,000. I think one guy made 200,000 on a probate property. It was two lots. And so a lot of people hear the word, or they think that now we're going to have to dig deep in this stuff. And I don't know if this time is worth it. Some of them can be big hits. And so I think it's one of the best niches that's out there for real estate. I love it. And I only dig deeper in this all the time, Tiffany. It's something that I'm always seeing different scenarios, different strategies, and it's exciting every day. I love being in it. So I think everybody can get after probate today.
Awesome. Well, how can people find you? Especially, I have a lot of folks that listen to us in Florida. So, how can people follow you, or is there a way you would like Florida people to reach out to you?
I mean, phone number's best, 904-999-0053. Leave a voicemail if you can't get us, or get us at our email, al@alnicoletti.com. And I'm all over social media. YouTube, you can find tons of videos that I talk about probate there, because there's not even an hour that we can get into where there's tons of entertainment about all this different probate strategies. YouTube, Instagram, @attorney Nicoletti. Find me on Facebook, and you'll see me everywhere on social media. So that's the best place you can find me.
Well, hats off. Not most attorneys are good at social media. So good. Is that a good funnel flow for you to get clients?
Yeah, I think it's a great platform to educate. I think in terms of clients or people seeing me, maybe an investor will see me and they'll DM me and say, "Hey, Al, I saw you speak at some event," or, just kind of keeps everybody kind of connected. And I think that's the best part, is that there's videos, little tidbits out there that really can help that one person. Had somebody, call me one time about a deal, and they said, "Hey, I heard your podcast and there was this one nugget dropped." And they said, because of that one nugget, boom, they found a deal. They were able to get the seller. So you just never know, but education is that platform for me.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on today. Now you're giving me homework, because it looks like I got some homework to do on my own estate planning, it looks like. I really appreciate it. I hope the folks listening to this got a ton of value, and go follow Al. I think that probate deals are some of our personal biggest deals that we get. And so you're missing out if you don't dive into probates. And again, Data Syndicate is a great list provider for probate specifically. So if they're in your county, it's super affordable to get the list. Dive in. And if you're in the state of Florida, go knock on Al's office door.
Thank you, Tiffany, so much for having me today. I loved it.
To wrap this up, if you guys want to go follow Al, I think it'd be a great YouTube channel to learn more about probates. And until the next time, I'll see you soon.